Life has a way of surprising us, sometimes in the best ways, and sometimes in ways we never saw coming. This is the story of two brothers, Tom and Daniel, who grew up side by side, sharing everything life had to offer, until one day, everything changed. It's a story about family, trust, and how the people we love the most can sometimes hurt us the deepest. Tom and Daniel were more than just siblings. They were best friends. Growing up in a quiet town, they spent their days running through the fields, playing in the backyard, and helping their father on the farm. Their bond was unshakable, or so Tom believed. They had their differences, like all brothers do, but at the end of the day, they always had each other's backs. Their father, a hard-working and wise man, often told them, "No matter what happens in life, family comes first." Tom believed those words with all his heart. Their father was a man who built his life with dedication and love. Over the years, he worked hard to provide for his sons, ensuring that they would never have to struggle. He built their home with his own hands, cared for the land that gave them food and shelter, and saved every penny to secure their future. Tom admired his father deeply, always by his side, learning, helping, and making sure their family stayed strong. Daniel, being the older brother, was more independent and often had other interests, but Tom never minded. He knew that, in the end, they would always stand together. Then, one day, everything changed. Their father, after years of hard work and sacrifice, passed away. It was a loss that shook them both. Though he had lived a full life, his absence left an emptiness in their hearts. Tom and Daniel grieved, but in different ways. Tom found comfort in their shared memories, in the lessons their father had taught them. He believed that, even in sorrow, they would stand by each other, just as they always had. But life had other plans. After the funeral, they were called to the lawyer's office to discuss the inheritance. Their father had left them his most valuable possessions: the house they had grown up in, the land they had played on, and the money he had saved over the years. But most importantly, he left them with one clear wish: everything was to be shared equally. Tom thought it was a fair decision. More than that, he believed it was a decision that would bring them closer. He imagined them working together, honoring their father's legacy, and keeping the family strong. But what should have been a moment of unity quickly became the beginning of something Tom never expected, something that would change their relationship forever. The air was heavy with grief as Tom and Daniel walked into the lawyer's office. It had only been a day since their father's funeral, and neither of them had fully processed their loss. The room smelled of old books and polished wood, and the lawyer, a middle-aged man with gray hair and tired eyes, gestured for them to sit. "First of all, I'm very sorry for your loss," the lawyer said gently. "Your father was a good man." Tom nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Their father had worked so hard to build a life for them, and now they were here to discuss what he had left behind. It felt wrong, almost too soon, but Tom reminded himself that this was what their father had planned for, to ensure that both his sons were taken care of. The lawyer opened a thick folder, adjusting his glasses as he read. "Your father left behind clear instructions regarding his estate. The house, the land, and the savings are to be divided equally between both of you." Tom glanced at Daniel, expecting to see a nod of agreement, but Daniel's expression was unreadable. His hands were clasped tightly, his jaw clenched. Something felt off. The lawyer continued, explaining the legal details, but Tom barely heard him. He was too focused on Daniel's body language, the way his fingers tapped impatiently against his leg, the way his eyes darkened. And then, just as the lawyer finished speaking, Daniel broke the silence. "That's not going to work," Daniel said flatly. Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel turned to him, his voice cold and unwavering. "I deserve more." For a moment, Tom thought he had misheard. He stared at his brother, waiting for him to explain, waiting for some kind of justification that made sense. But Daniel didn't hesitate. "I was the eldest," Daniel continued. "I should have control over the house, the land, and the money. It's my right." Tom felt a rush of confusion and disbelief. "Our father wanted us to share everything," he said, his voice shaky. "That was his wish." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "Our father didn't know what was best. I've struggled more than you, Tom. I need this more than you do." Tom felt like the room was spinning. This was his brother, the same brother he had played with as a child, the same brother he had looked up to. How could he say this? How could he dismiss their father's wishes so easily? "You need it more than me?" Tom asked, his voice rising. "I worked just as hard as you. I was the one who stayed with Dad, helped him when he got sick, made sure everything was taken care of, and now you're saying you deserve everything." Daniel's expression didn't change. "You don't understand, Tom. You never have. I've had to fight for everything in my life, and I'm not going to let this slip away." Tom felt something inside him break. The bond they had shared, the trust they had built over years, it was crumbling before his eyes. "You're being selfish," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel stood up abruptly. "Call it whatever you want, but I'm taking what's mine." The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the rising tension. "Legally, the will states that everything is to be divided equally," he reminded them. Daniel turned to the lawyer with a smirk. "Then I guess we'll have to find another way." Tom sat there, frozen, as Daniel stormed out of the office. He had never felt so betrayed. The brother he once knew was gone, replaced by a man who cared more about money than family. And for the first time in his life, Tom realized that Daniel was no longer just his brother. He was his enemy. Tom couldn't let it go. The moment they left the lawyer's office, he followed Daniel down the street, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and desperation. The funeral was still fresh in their minds. Their father's voice still echoed in his heart, reminding him of what family was supposed to mean. And yet, here they were, about to tear each other apart over something their father had left for both of them. "Daniel, stop," Tom called out, but his brother kept walking. "We need to talk." Daniel finally turned around, his expression cold and unreadable. "What is there to talk about?" he asked. Tom took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "You know what Dad wanted," he said. "He wanted us to share everything. He didn't want us fighting over this." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Dad wanted a lot of things, Tom. But wanting something and making it a reality are two different things." Tom felt a sting in his chest. "But this is our family, our home. You're willing to throw all of that away just to have more?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "You don't get it. You never have. I need this, Tom. I've spent my whole life trying to make something for myself, and this is my chance. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." Tom shook his head in disbelief. "You're acting like I don't matter. Like my work, my sacrifices, mean nothing. Daniel crossed his arms. I'm the older brother. I should be the one in charge. It's always been that way. Tom clenched his fists. That's not how this works, Daniel. We're supposed to be equals. We're supposed to take care of each other. Daniel took a step closer, his voice sharp. I am taking care of myself, and that's all that matters. Tom felt like he was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the Daniel he had grown up with. The brother who had once protected him from bullies, who had stayed up late with him on stormy nights, who had promised they would always stand together. That Daniel was gone. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. His brother wasn't just being greedy. He was cutting Tom out of his life completely. That night, Tom went back to their father's house. Or rather, what used to be their father's house. Daniel had already begun making changes. Their father's favorite chair was missing. The old clock on the wall, gone. The family pictures that once lined the shelves had been taken down. It didn't feel like home anymore. Tom walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He ran his fingers over the wooden table where their father used to sit and tell them stories about his youth. He had imagined sitting there with Daniel, reminiscing, keeping their father's memory alive. But now, that dream was gone. Daniel entered the room, his arms crossed. What are you still doing here? He asked. Tom turned to him, his voice hollow. I just wanted to say goodbye. Daniel scoffed. Goodbye? Where are you going? Tom exhaled slowly. I don't know yet, but I can't stay here. Not like this. For a second, just a second, something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Regret? Doubt? Tom couldn't tell. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. You do what you have to do, Daniel said, his voice emotionless. But this is mine now. Tom nodded. He had no fight left in him. He picked up his small bag of belongings, the only things Daniel had allowed him to take, and walked to the door. Before stepping out, he turned back one last time. You were my brother, Tom whispered, and now I don't even know who you are. Daniel didn't respond. Tom stepped out into the night, leaving behind not just his childhood home, but the last pieces of the brother he once loved. Tom wandered aimlessly through the streets, the weight of his father's death and Daniel's betrayal pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The sun had long set, but he barely noticed the world around him. How had his life fallen apart so quickly? Just weeks ago, he had a family, a father he loved, a brother he trusted, a home filled with memories, and now he had nothing. The night was cold, but the chill in his heart was even colder. He kept replaying the moment in the lawyer's office, Daniel's voice, firm and unyielding. I deserve more. The words echoed over and over, cutting into him like a blade. Tom had spent his whole life believing in fairness, believing that family would always stand together. But Daniel had shattered that belief in an instant. He found himself walking toward the house. No, Daniel's house now. But he couldn't bring himself to step inside. Instead, he stood outside, staring up at the windows where the lights still shone. He could see shadows moving inside. Daniel was in there, living his new life, enjoying the home that was supposed to belong to both of them. Anger flared up inside him. How could Daniel do this? He wanted to march inside, to demand his share, to make his brother understand the pain he had caused. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. Daniel had made his choice. And now, Tom had to figure out what to do next. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling no better than the night before. He knew he couldn't just accept this. There had to be a way to fix it. Determined, he made his way back to the lawyer's office. He wasn't going to give up, not yet. The office was quiet when he arrived. The lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, looked up from his desk with tired eyes. "Tom," he said, motioning for him to sit. "I had a feeling you'd be back." Tom sat down, his heart pounding. "There has to be something we can do," he said firmly. "This isn't fair. My father wanted us to share everything." Mr. Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand how you feel, and you're right. Your father did intend for everything to be shared." He paused. "But Daniel is refusing to cooperate, and legally, his name is on everything now." Tom clenched his fists. "But that's not what Dad wanted." The lawyer gave him a sympathetic look. "Legally, the only way to fight this is to take it to court. But that's a long, expensive process. It could take years. And there's no guarantee you'll win." Tom swallowed hard. He didn't have years. He didn't have the money for legal battles. "So you're saying there's nothing I can do?" Mr. Reynolds sighed again. "Unless Daniel willingly agrees to share, your options are limited." The words hit Tom like a punch to the stomach. He had come here hoping for a solution, some way to reclaim what was rightfully his. But now he was walking away with nothing. Again. Tom left the office feeling more lost than ever. His feet carried him through the streets, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in the past. He thought about all the times he and Daniel had played together as kids, running through the fields near their house, laughing without a care in the world. He thought about the nights they stayed up late talking, making plans for the future. A future where they were always together. And then he thought about their father. His father had worked so hard to build a life for them. He had taught them the value of family, of standing by each other no matter what. If he could see them now, what would he think? The thought made Tom's chest tighten. He would be heartbroken. Was this what his father had feared? Had he seen this coming? Had he known that Daniel would one day turn against his own brother? The idea made Tom sick. As he walked, he found himself in front of their childhood treehouse, the one their father had built for them when they were kids. It was old now, the wood worn and weathered, but it still stood strong. Tom climbed up, sitting on the wooden floor, staring out at the land that used to be his home. Tears burned his eyes. He had lost everything. His father, his home, his brother. He had never felt so alone. Days passed, but the pain didn't fade. Every time he saw something that reminded him of their father, he felt a fresh wave of grief. He tried to push forward to figure out what to do next, but every path seemed blocked. He couldn't return home. He had no money, no direction. And worst of all, no family. One night, as he sat alone in a small motel room he had barely been able to afford, he stared at his phone. His fingers hovered over Daniel's number. Should he call? Should he try one last time to fix this? His pride told him no. His heart told him yes. Finally, he set the phone down. Daniel had made his choice. And now, Tom had to make his. Was he going to keep fighting for justice? Or was it time to walk away and start over? For the first time in his life, Tom truly didn't know what to do. And that terrified him. Tom had told himself he was done. He had promised that he would move on, leave the past behind, and start a new life. But no matter how hard he tried, something kept pulling him back to the house. It wasn't just a house. It was the place where he had grown up, where he had built his memories, where he had been part of a family. And now, it felt like a stranger's home, like something had been ripped away from him. The sun had set by the time he arrived. The house stood in the quiet night, its windows glowing dimly from inside. He stared at it from a distance, his heart pounding. Why was he here? He wasn't sure. Maybe he just wanted closure. Maybe he wanted to say goodbye. Or maybe, deep down, a small part of him still hoped for something more. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and knocked on the door. He didn't expect an answer. But after a long pause, the door slowly creaked open. And there stood Daniel. The two brothers locked eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Tom felt his breath catch as he took in Daniel's face. He looked different. The anger was gone. The confidence that had once filled his voice in the lawyer's office had faded. Instead, he looked tired. Daniel was the first to break the silence. His voice was quieter than before, lacking the sharpness it had carried in their last meeting. Tom swallowed. I wasn't sure if you'd answer. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. I almost didn't. The weight of their history hung between them, all the years of brotherhood, shattered by greed and betrayal. Finally, Daniel exhaled and stepped back. Do you want to come in? Tom hesitated. He had told himself he was done with this place, done with Daniel. But now, standing here, he realized something. Maybe walking away had been easier than facing the truth. Without a word, he stepped inside. The house looked the same, yet it felt completely different. The furniture was still in place. Their father's old chair sat in the corner. The family pictures still lined the walls. But it wasn't home anymore. Tom slowly walked through the living room, his fingers grazing the wooden table where he and Daniel used to sit as kids, playing card games late into the night. So much had changed. Daniel sat down first, rubbing his hands together anxiously. Tom followed, sitting across from him. A heavy silence stretched between them before Tom finally spoke. Why did you do it, Daniel? His voice was steady, but there was hurt beneath it. Daniel sighed, leaning back. He stared at the ceiling as if searching for the right words. I was scared, he admitted finally. When Dad died, I felt like everything was slipping away. I thought if I had the house, the land, the money, then at least I'd have something left, something to hold on to. Tom frowned. So you thought taking everything would make you feel safe? Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, but it didn't. For the first time since this whole fight began, Tom saw something in Daniel's eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Regret. The brother he had once loved wasn't gone. He was just lost. And maybe, so was Tom. Tom exhaled, feeling the weight in his chest loosen. Just a little. This conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain or undo what had happened. But it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still a way forward. The silence between the two brothers stretched, heavy with everything that had happened. Tom could still feel the weight of betrayal, the pain of losing not just his inheritance but his own brother. Daniel took a deep breath and finally spoke. I was wrong, Tom. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I let my fear and greed control me. I thought if I had everything, I'd feel secure. I thought I needed it all to prove something, to myself, to the world. But I see now that I was just pushing you away. Tom studied Daniel's face, searching for any trace of dishonesty. But for the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't look like the man who had fought for money and land. He looked like his brother. Daniel's voice wavered as he continued. I didn't just take Dad's house. I took our family, our memories, our bond, and I ruined it. And I hate myself for it. He lowered his head, his hands clenched into fists. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry, Tom. I really am. Heart pounded. This was the moment he had wanted, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to do with it. He wanted to stay angry, to remind Daniel of every cruel word, every selfish action, but at the same time, he saw the pain in Daniel's eyes. He saw the regret, and he felt something else too. Hope. Tom sighed. I don't know if I can forget what you did. His voice was honest, firm. You hurt me, Daniel, more than I ever thought you could. Daniel nodded. I know. Tom hesitated, then added, but I don't want to hate you forever. Daniel looked up, surprised. I don't know if things can go back to the way they were, Tom admitted, but maybe they don't have to. Maybe we can just start from where we are now. A long pause. Then, for the first time in a long time, Daniel gave a small, broken smile. I'd like that. The road ahead wasn't easy. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight, and trust wasn't something that could be instantly rebuilt. But as Tom stood to leave, Daniel didn't just let him walk out. Instead, he followed him to the door and said, Maybe we can meet again soon, just to talk. Tom glanced at him and nodded. Yeah, I think I'd like that. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Tom didn't feel like he had lost everything. He still had a brother. As Tom walked away from the house, he felt lighter, but not entirely free. The past few weeks had been some of the hardest of his life. He had lost his father, his home, and for a time, his brother. The pain of Daniel's betrayal still lingered, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. It wasn't just about the money or the land. It was about what they had lost as brothers. They had grown up together, shared childhood secrets, and stood by each other through tough times. And yet, in a matter of days, all of that had been shattered, broken by greed, fear, and anger. Tom had spent so much time grieving over the loss of his inheritance, but now he realized something more important. The real loss was their relationship. He had lost his brother once. Would he lose him forever? As he reached the end of the driveway, he glanced back at the house one last time. For weeks, this place had felt like a prison, a painful reminder of what had been taken from him. But now, for the first time, it didn't seem so cold. Maybe it wasn't just a house. Maybe, just maybe, it could still be a home. Tom didn't know what the future held. He and Daniel couldn't undo the past, and their relationship might never be the same. But at least now, there was a chance to rebuild, a chance to forgive, a chance to be brothers again. It wouldn't be easy. Trust wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, but as Tom walked away, he realized something. He didn't have to carry this weight alone anymore, and that, more than anything, gave him hope.